Okay, welcome to the final panel of the day, everyone. We have heard from the lawyers, we've heard from some members of the trans community, and it's time to hear from some of the other key stakeholders in debate. Like the other panels, the panelists on this one need no introduction, so I'm going to keep my introductions brief, and I'm going to do them all at the same time, so as not to interrupt the flow of the presentations. So first up, we have Dr. Suen Tung from CUHK. Dr. Suen is Assistant Professor of Gender Studies at CUHK and is known to all of us, of course, as the principal investigator of a study commissioned by the AOC on anti-discrimination legislation. Next up, Geoffrey Yeung, who has recently returned from his time as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford and is currently a pupil barrister. Fern Ngai, who is Chief Executive Officer of Community Business, a not-for-profit organization which has done much to advance sexual minority rights in a business context. And it was under Fern's leadership that Community Business launched the LGBT plus Workplace Inclusion Index. And last but certainly not least, Sam Winter, who will be joining us via Skype, as I understand. Sam is an Associate Professor of Health Sciences at Curtin University in Australia. He is a psychologist and an expert on trans issues. So with that, I hand over the mic to Suen. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone, and I first of all want to thank Kelly and HKU for the invitation. It's always a bit scary to speak at the Faculty of Law as I'm not a lawyer. I'm actually a sociologist. And as you can see from the title of the presentation, that we believe that we might be able to contribute to the debate by providing some empirical data on gender recognition and mental health of transgender people in Hong Kong. In fact, that's the kind of very boring approach that we've always taken on LGBTI issues in different debates, that we think that by providing some empirical evidence on different topics that are usually clouded by a lot of emotional debates, we might be able to clarify some of the issues about the need for legislation, about some of the thinking behind legislation. So I also wanted to acknowledge the assistants and the different authors that have also contributed to the debate that my colleagues have been working with me together. So these are some of the work that we have previously done, and I just wanted to, then maybe that's the controversial thing about whether empirical data should intervene in any policy debate, especially as I think a lot of us would be thinking about, well, we're talking about human rights issues, whether we should look at empirical data. But I guess as a sociologist that I've always been trained to think about that empirical data should also provide important input to social policy debates, because in a way that it's a more philosophical debate that we won't have time to go into here, but that the very difficult thing about public opinion, for example, that whether a policy should step too far ahead from public opinion or not. So I think there's still a lot of issues that empirical evidence can provide to the debate. So today in this short presentation, we're going to try to draw on the empirical evidence about trans people in Hong Kong that we've conducted in the past few years, including from the study with the EOC, going to show you a little bit about what happens when transgender people live with the gender but present on their ID card and other gender marker, the kind of discrimination that they're going to look at in society, that they're going to experience in society, in order to look at why there is a need for legal gender recognition. We're also going to draw a little bit on the mental health of transgender people in Hong Kong in a recent paper that we have published. Unfortunately, the mental health of transgender people in Hong Kong is equally bad as transgender people in other parts of the world. And we're going to show you some staggering figures from about mental health of transgender people in Hong Kong. And also we're going to present a little bit of data that was collected with the Transgender Resource Center looking at transgender people's attitudes towards legal gender recognition. And then also in response to one of the points that Stephen mentioned this morning about whether society is ready or not. In fact, I think similar to a lot of public attitudes towards LGBTI issues, we see that on transgender people, the Hong Kong public has come a long way from before, and we're also going to show some of the statistics from that. So, the study on legislation against discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, and intersex status was conducted by the Gender Research Center, commissioned by the EOC. And in that study, we included 2 focus groups with transgender people and also one group specifically for sex worker. And in that study, we got evidence that when there are perceived discrepancies between individuals' gender appearance and the gender marker shown on their ID cards, then there would be a lot of issues that transgender people face in different domains of life, including employment, education, provision of goods and services, disposal and management of premises, and government functions. So many of these specific examples would have been covered by speakers in the morning, including for example, job interviews or dismissal. So many of the trans people in our focus groups were telling us that when you go to a company and present yourself in an interview, then the HR person may ask you excessively when you appear in a certain lived gender but present with a different gender marker on the ID card. And education as well, bullying from peers and also teachers is not uncommon. And I think the other examples have already been quite excessively, sufficiently discussed this morning, including differential quality and treatment in service provision, shopping, bank account opening, and also just calling the bank, inquiring about your own bank account, and using public toilets, police, and immigration department. And in terms of mental health of transgender people in Hong Kong, the data was collected by Transgender Resource Center, and we were collaborating to provide some analysis for the data. And the results have just been published in the Journal of Homosexuality, actually this past month, I think. And these some of the things that I think as a backdrop to think about why there is a need for legal gender recognition in Hong Kong is also, I think these figures like, let's put everything aside. Let's put, even daringly to say, let's even put human rights aside. Let's put everything aside. In a society when within any social group, that if you see that 63.2% had contemplated suicide, let alone whichever religion that you have got, whichever educational background you've got, whichever social function that you are in, whether you are a government representative, that you should think that there is some issue to think about when a certain group in society, that among them 63.2% had contemplated suicide. And that is what's happening with the transgender community in Hong Kong. And also 18.4% of the transgender people surveyed had in fact attempted suicide. And we also particularly think that there's also the age issue as well. If we looked at those who were aged below 30, 70.4% had contemplated suicide, and 24.1% of those aged below 30 had attempted suicide. That means among transgender people in Hong Kong aged below 30, about 1/4, 1 in 4, had attempted suicide. So if well, the other class that I teach is society and health and social inequalities in health. I can't think of many other examples among different socioeconomic differences, be it racial, ethnic, religious, rural, urban, that would show such differential among mental health of any social group in society. So I think that's the background that a little bit that I wanted to talk about why legal gender recognition. I think we should move on to talk about, I was really surprised to see that in the consultation, the first question is whether there should be legal gender recognition or not. I think that's a non-question, that shouldn't even be asked in the first place. It's not whether there should be, it's how. And so I'm then going to pass on the time to my co-author Randolph. We really talk about that. We've got so many collaborations among the different authors in our team. So I'm going to pass the time to Geoffrey.
Sorry about that. That's not the first time. He always does that. So hello everyone, I'm Geoffrey. As Marco introduced, I'm currently a Pupil Barrister in Hong Kong, but before becoming a Pupil Barrister, I worked with Dr. Suen over the past year or so as a founding associate fellow of the Sexualities Research Program. And we've done a number of research and studies, and this is the latest set of data that we analyzed, and it's actually being discussed openly for the first time ever. So that might be quite interesting. So the starting point for the discussion, because I am a lawyer in training, so I'll start with judgment, which is W, which has been discussed for many times. So what we're looking here is the three words, undesirable coercive effect, which Michael Wittler has also mentioned this morning, which the Court of Final Appeal expressed concern about, and we were thinking, so the questions we had in mind were, so does this undesirable coercive effect, is there evidence that it exists in Hong Kong among the trans community? And in what way does it exist? Although it sounds like, for me, it sounds like that it's logical, that the observation is logical, but having evidence to support that would be a useful addition, or maybe evidence doesn't support that, and it would be a useful information as well. So the survey that we're talking about is actually designed by the community. So it's designed by the Transgender Resource Center, and the survey questions were designed by them, and they recruited the participants through their website. What the SRP is doing here is basically providing a data analysis and trying to draw conclusions or tentative conclusions from them to either indicate potential directions for future research, or maybe inform the debate that we're having now. So it's very much an exploratory study. It sounds like qualification. In Chinese, we're wearing a helmet, but it is an exploratory study. But I do think there are some insights we can really draw from them. So the first question is this, or the first data is this. We had in our sample, or the survey that we have, the sample among the transgender respondents in our survey, only 5% of them have changed their gender marker on the Hong Kong identity card. And that's quite staggering, because that means the absolute majority of the transgender community does not seem, or at least not the absolute majority of the transgender respondents in our survey, have indicate that they are not using the mechanisms that is currently available for them to use to change the gender marker. And we know that the current system, one of the major requirements for changing the gender marker on their identity documents is to have full sex reassignment surgery. So the next data is about surgeries. We also found that among the respondents in the survey, 79.7% of those who have not yet changed their gender marker on their identity documents would actually consider would or may actually consider doing so if sex reassignment surgery is not required. So that seems to indicate, if you look at the data, that seems to indicate that currently there is a large proportion, or at least from the survey that we have, there is a large proportion of transgender people who are being prevented from accessing the right to legal gender recognition by way of changing the gender marker on the identity documents. Moreover, this is one of the observations that are most related to the undesirable coercive effect that we were talking about. There are 20.9% of the respondents, which is quite a sizable proportion from the survey, who have not done any part of SRS and would also not consider doing such surgeries, especially if SRS is not required for changing the gender markers on their, and of course, if society is accepting. So there are quite a few factors there, but it at least indicates that there are a sizable proportion of respondents, transgender respondents in that survey, who would actually not consider, in an ideal case, they would not consider going through the sex reassignment surgeries. And even for those who consider going through sex reassignment surgeries, there's a diversity in the preferences in relation to the extent to which they want to undergo these surgeries. So, for example, the 29.7% do not want or do not want to undergo sterilization surgeries, or at least they find them less or not important. And slightly more of those respondents do not want to undergo genital reconstruction, or they find such surgeries less or not important. So what we see here is there's an indication that even among those who want to do surgeries, they have different preferences, and any requirement for full sex reassignment surgery is a requirement for a full set of sex reassignment surgery. They don't allow that kind of flexibility. So some of the conclusions that we can draw from Dr. Suen's presentation and my presentation, that calls it even, is that firstly, from the study with the EOC, it's clear that the lack of legal gender recognition is related to discrimination faced by transgender people in Hong Kong. And we have also found that there is a poor state of mental health faced by transgender people in Hong Kong. Although we have not done a study, but there are also other studies in the literature indicating that discrimination is a factor that leads to poorer states of mental health, and it's also quite a logical step. And some of the tentative conclusions from the exploratory study that I just talked about was that with the existing surgery requirement, it seems like a very small percentage, at least from our survey, changed their gender marker, and that much more of them would or may consider changing the gender marker if surgery requirement is lifted. And a sizable proportion, again from the respondents in our survey, would actually not consider going through reassignment surgeries. And lastly, even if they go through reassignment surgeries, there is a diversity in the extent to which they want to undergo these surgeries, and which means that there seems to be some indication that there is a potential that the undesirable coercive effect does exist. Although, wearing the helmet again, this is an indicative research, and it will be much more. It will also be very useful if we are able to conduct any future surveys to confirm these observations. But I think they do help to inform the debate we have today. And lastly, I think there is a little bit of cause for optimism, because we have been talking the whole day about the legislature would never pass anything. The whole society the society is not convinced. In a study of the EOC, there's a telephone representative survey. So this is a representative sample from the Hong Kong population, and although if we simply look at the left, the second column, it seems a little bit sad that there is about like 30% in every age group who thinks that who has a negative attitude towards transgender people. But there is actually more. If you look at the second column from the right, there's actually more who think that being transgender is not wrong at all. They have absolutely no problem with someone being who want to change the agenda. Basically, they have no problem at all with someone being transgender. And although we don't have like the data from maybe 10 years ago, but I think that may indicate that the Hong Kong population may be more ready than we would otherwise think. And at least in terms of discrimination legislation for sexual orientation, gender identity, and intersex status, overall about 55.7, so about 56% support such a legislation, and particularly among those who are aged 18 to 24, over 90% of those respondents supported such a legislation. And this is a lot of improvement, at least in terms of discrimination legislation. This is a lot of improvement from a number of years ago. So I'll just end on an optimistic note, cautiously optimistic note, so as to let the good dialogue going. Okay. Yeah, that's here.
I'll be careful next time.
Okay. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank CCPL, Lily, Kelly, and also the EOC for co-hosting today's event. It's been extremely informative and also very inspiring. First of all, let's get the slides up. Has anybody here not heard of community business before? Oh, come on. I'm sure some of you have not heard. Okay, all right, okay. All right. Okay, I think everyone's tired, so just hold up your hand is a chore. Okay, so we are a not-for-profit based in Hong Kong. We work across Asia with companies, helping them to be more responsible and inclusive. So we believe in harnessing the power of business to drive social change. And the work that we're doing on LGBT inclusion is a great example of that. So this shows our own journey in terms of LGBT inclusion. We started way back in 2009 when we launched our campaign, and our campaign was called Creating Inclusive Workplaces for LGBT People. If you can imagine, that was like 8 years ago. We started talking about even before that. And even today, the subject of LGBT has some sensitivity to it, but I think even back then, even more stigma. We are known for our thought leadership in this area. We started off by publishing a number of employer guides on how to create an inclusive workplace. We conducted a climate study in Hong Kong, a groundbreaking study in 2011, 2012, and then decided to start the index in 2015. And so in the last few years, this has really driven a huge amount of demand from the corporate sector, mainly the multinationals. But we work across many different areas in diversity inclusion, including gender, disability, culture, age, and so on. But LGBT is the area that is growing the fastest for us. So we are extremely grateful. We're grateful to some of the people in this room and on the panels today for the guidance and the insights and support that they've given us. Otherwise, I mean, we do a lot of partnering and working with other organizations. And I must admit that our focus up to now has largely been on the L and the G. We have started to have more of a focus on the T, the B and the T, but we need to do a lot more to be trans competent and knowledgeable about some of the issues and the needs of the transgender community. So our approach is based on raising awareness, providing resources, education, training, and driving the adoption of best practice. LGBT, what's it got to do with business? So many times when we work with companies, and when they haven't, especially the ones that are really focusing, most companies will focus on gender, i.e. women first. And when we start to talk to them about LGBT, people ask, well, why? Or, why does this impact on business? Because they're, in their minds, this is about people's personal lives. Their sexual orientation or gender identity is about their private lives, which maybe has not a lot to do with their work. But the way we consider this whole area, it is about people's identity as human beings. It's about human rights, and it's about how included and respected people would feel if they were as if they were able to express who they were as their straight colleagues. So it's just as simple as that. So the next few slides are about the business case. I know I'm probably talking to an audience who are already convinced of this, but bear with me. I'll just go through very, very quickly. And I know that the previous speakers gave me some additional time, so we have some time to work through this. But this is really, really important, because if companies aren't convinced of the business case, this is not going to be sustainable. Sometimes the initiatives around LGBT inclusion come from the top. A lot of times it comes from the top. Sometimes it comes from the bottom through employees. But for this to be sustained, companies need to be convinced about the business case. So in terms of the business drivers, the first one is around productivity and performance. There's been a lot of research in this area that shows that productivity suffers when LGBT employees don't feel they can be open about their sexual orientation or gender identity in the workplace. According to a study by Stonewall, which is an organization in the UK, concealing one's sexual orientation at work could reduce their productivity by up to 30%. So if you consider in any working population, there could be 5 to 10% LGBT, and it affects their productivity by 30%. It's quite significant. And then when you consider their friends and supporters and families, the population grows. According to our own climate study that we conducted in 2011-2012, we found that non-inclusive workplaces were bad for business. 85% of LGBT employees say that non-inclusive workplaces negatively impact on their well-being, productivity, and engagement. 53% are exhausted, depressed, and stressed, pretending to be someone they're not. And 54% say that it's difficult to build authentic relationships with colleagues. So the next big driver, and I think this is the primary driver with a lot of businesses, is on talent attraction and retention. So an inclusive workplace will impact a company's inability to attract and retain top talent. So if we assume that 5 to 10% of the working population is LGBT, and then we include their friends, families, and so on, research has shown that these employees are more likely to stay with companies that practice inclusive behaviors. And also, if you look at the Gen Y, or in Hong Kong, the post-80s or 90s generations, research show that they really value diversity and inclusion, and that's what they expect from the workplace. So if companies want to be able to attract, these employees, they need to start thinking about this. And I think there's an estimate that in the next 10 years, the millennials and the Gen Y population will grow and dominate the workforce. So research has also shown that openly gay employees, openly out employees, they have a greater trust in their employers. They feel more loyal to their organizations, and are likely to continue with the same company for a greater period of time compared to their closeted counterparts. Okay. And then finally, this is a huge driver, especially for companies that are much more enlightened in this area. Many companies are starting to develop products and services to tap into the pink dollar, which is estimated to be worth up to US $800 billion just in Asia alone, and more than $3 trillion globally. That's per annum. And of course, companies do care about their reputation and risk management, potential damage to corporate reputation and loss of customers. So companies are now telling us that their clients are saying to them that they need to demonstrate commitment to diversity and inclusion and the same things that they're committed to. Otherwise, they won't get their business. And finally, companies also need to consider the cost of ignoring the needs of their LGBT employees. Now, this operates at different levels at the individual, organization, and ultimately impacts on their bottom line. Discrimination, harassment, and bullying in the workplace can lead to low self-esteem, demotivation, stress, anxiety, depression, etc. of individuals. And that often leads to low staff morale, increased absenteeism, decreased productivity, and recruitment and retention problems. So that, in a nutshell, is the business case. So the next section of my presentation is about the changing landscape. So, and I think you can see across Asia, you do see a lot of positive change, social change, legal change, and so on. And Hong Kong, I think Hong Kong does need to catch up. So, I mean, it's quite different in various markets, but, you know, I can say that there's a lot of momentum, a lot of people that are working in various ways with the business community, but also generally, with social change. In Hong Kong, there's been quite a lot of positive change. You can see the EOC is doing a lot of work. Earlier this year, we were involved in with over 70-something companies, organizations that joined the EOC in the call for comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation. And other changes, groups like HK Gala, the Gay and Lesbian Attorneys Network, started by Mark, who's in the audience, and Wally, Pink Dot, the Pride Parade. There's a lot of, you know, seminars, forums like this, but in the business community that talk about some of these issues. And on the top left, you can see that is from our, I think it was last year, our 2016 LGBT Awards presentation for our Transgender Inclusion Award. That was won by Casper. And we had two of the other role models in transgender inclusion, Mimi and Joanne. And I just want to make a plug. We've actually announced our 2018 awards, and we have a new Transgender Inclusion Award. So we have a number of awards, and this is one of the ones. It's to recognize an organization or individual who's played a proactive and visible role in promoting transgender inclusion in the workplace and business community in Hong Kong. So starting November, we'll be accepting nominations for that. So what we try to do is, through our awards and our index, try to move the needle and raise awareness. The banking industry has done a lot in this area. I think they started probably more than 10 years ago with the start of the Interbank Forum. Now 16, there's probably more now, allow clients to remove the personal titles in their bank account. And you can see, you know, some of the marketing and branding from HSBC, and also some of the products like the LGBT Equality Index by Credit Suisse, and some other products from like Standard Chartered, their mortgage product. I think I'm not sure if that's rolled out in Hong Kong yet. But you can see the banking community is really, you know, leading the rest of the industries. So we introduced Asia's first benchmark for LGBT inclusion in Hong Kong in 2015. On the left, you see the various categories, 8 categories that we assess companies on, from policy to training, structure, benefits, their culture, market positioning, monitoring, and what they do in the community and in advocacy. And you can see the chart on the right are the top companies, the top 10 companies, and largely dominated by the banks. So the index is designed to drive the adoption of best practice in the corporate sector, to provide the motivation for action by creating a sense of competition. And I must say, especially the banks are extremely competitive, to capture the attention of the media, which I think helps, and harnessing the power of business to drive, to impact social change, which is our purpose. So 2 years ago, when we had the index, we had one specific question around transgender benefits. So we asked companies, does your organization offer any benefit or support specifically for transgender employees? So at that time, you can see on the right-hand side, 27 out of 35 companies said no, and 8 said yes. So this was 2 years ago. And we also had Transgender, we had a Community Impact Award, of which the Transgender Resource Center was one of the finalists. So you can see that, it was 2 years ago. There wasn't a lot going on, but you'll be happy to know that in the last 2 years and going forward, there's going to be much more being done by the corporate sector. Okay, and going back still on 2015, some of the best practices. Goldman Sachs, they have had a long-established employee network, and its mission statement says it supports all LGBT professionals, including transgender. I don't believe they currently have any transgender employees, but I think that it's really important to state that they do support the transgender employees. Telstra has a very comprehensive discrimination and bullying policy, which includes transgender employees. And when we assess how companies do in this area, we ask that they are very, very specific, including identifying the types of behaviors that are not tolerated. So we go into a lot of depth into what constitutes the right behaviors and what doesn't. And again, 2 years ago, one of the law firms, Latham and Watkins, their medical insurance, this is in Hong Kong, covered gender reassignment surgery. And Maker Bay designed its washrooms to be gender neutral. And you see that a lot now. And then now, this year, our second iteration of the index, we're running the index every 2 years. We had a number of important changes to the index overall. We decided to add the plus sign on LGBT, so incorporating other acronyms besides just LGBT. We also removed the word workplace from the name of our index because we are looking at things that companies are doing outside of the workplace, so in the community, advocating for change and so on. And we added some more emphasis on transgender and reference to intersex, and we added a new category, strategy and leadership accountability. And we also introduced an SME version of the index because we really feel it's important for small companies, not just the large multinationals, to be concerned about this. And again, the financial services industry showed its leadership. In fact, all top 12 companies are banks, so either international, investment banks or commercial banks. But we look forward to other companies breaking into the top 12 next time. So you can see here we had 40 participating companies in the main index. And one thing that we do in order to encourage companies to participate, we allow companies to do it anonymously. So we know who they are, but we will not publish their results unless they're happy for us to. So those are the companies that participated. You see a lot of law firms, probably quite a lot of diversity this time compared to the first time. But some areas, I think I have a slide. So these are the 11 participating SMEs. And yeah, so this slide I wanted to show you. So we had quite a diversity in terms of the sizes of companies. This is for the main index. And by industry, you can see about half were from financial services. We had 8 law firms, but quite different industries being represented. Very few technology companies, 1 hotel. There are so many companies that really need to be concerned about the whole area of LGBT inclusion, not only from the workplace standpoint, but in terms of services and products that they provide to their clients and customers. Okay. So this time, in terms of the questions, very, very quickly, we asked, does your organization have workplace gender transition guidelines for employees in Hong Kong? And half of them said no, but 8 said that they were in progress. 13 had global or regional guidelines applicable in Hong Kong. None of them developed guidelines specifically to Hong Kong. And then they covered other areas such as expectations, who was responsible in the organization for the guidelines and so on. And so you can see that there has been change in the last few years. And one of the things that we will be doing is arranging a workshop on this area, because companies are coming to us and asking us, you asked us the question, now we need training, we need to understand, how to do this. And there's a lot of resources through organizations like Stonewall that would be beneficial to companies here as well. This question, what does your LGBT diversity training in Hong Kong cover? So we do see some training covering transgender, at least definitions of transgender, gender fluidity, intersex, and so on, and defining and explaining transitioning. So that's a good sign as well. This question is, does your organization offer any benefits or support specifically to LGBT employees? And you can see here, more companies are offering transgender inclusive medical insurance, so support for gender reassignment surgery or hormone therapy. And many of them are introducing gender neutral facilities, washrooms, and so on. And some best practices. So on the right, you see ANZ has a very, very comprehensive set of gender transition guidelines. And they, as far as I know, they currently don't have any transgender employees in Hong Kong. So the index has been a game changer. We feel that it has contributed to more open and public debate. We have joined the call for anti-discrimination legislation along with all the companies. The companies are starting to show much more tendency towards advocacy. And I believe that together we're working with all the companies and NGOs, organizations like the EOC, in broadening attitudes of the general public. So this index has been instrumental in driving change in the corporate sector in terms of adopting best practice, changing culture and mindsets, and creating greater progress on workplace inclusion. And we feel that the whole subject of LGBT is no longer the taboo subject it once was. I think in some circles it still is, but in the international community, definitely not. And we need to work on the local business community. So there is still some way to go. We know that we focused a lot on L and G. We need to do a lot more on transgender. We will definitely be working much more with companies, and companies do need to be much more prepared to handle gender transition, because if they're not facing any issues today, they definitely will in the future. So we will continue to work with the corporate sector. If you have companies that have an interest in participating in our index or learning about what we do, please do refer them to us. So this is just really just talking about the work that we do. And really what we're trying to do is lift the bar, stretch companies towards international best practice, and help them all around in their business, not just in the workplace, but also outwardly in what they provide to their clients and customers, and also their stakeholders as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to try to Skype Sam in. We get some technical assistance, please.
In front of the camera. Yeah, talk.
Hello, Sam. This is Marco. Can you hear us?
Hello, Marco.
Thank you very much for joining us, and you can take it away.
Okay, well, I'm going to try and share my Skype screen. Let's see if this works.
He would do. He would do. He would do this.
The familiar site of the Hong Kong University lecture hall.
So right now he's doing to share his slide. Okay. Yep. Yes.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, although we'll need to move your image box.
Right.
Yeah, okay, here we go.
I'd like to get rid of that completely there. Well, I'll just keep it so that I can reach it if I need to. Okay, so let's see if this works. I'm really happy to talk to you today. Good afternoon, everybody. Normally, I would be talking to you from Perth, where I now live. But I've been at a UN meeting in Bangkok. I'm speaking to you from a hotel room. Checkout time. So let's hope that the hotel doesn't cut off the Wi-Fi. I could say that we have some cock suites here. I've been in this hotel for 4 days, 4 complete days, without stepping outside even for one moment. And I think the air conditioning is getting to me. So, let's begin. Worldwide, transgender people, or trans people, live daily with stigma and the consequences. Those consequences include poor health and poor well-being outcomes. Let's take a little bit of a look at that. There you have at the top of the diagram the daily experience of stigma, leading to all sorts of experiences of harassment and abuse, prejudice and discrimination expressed in so many ways, and the threat of violence, actually for so many trans people worldwide, the actual experience of violence on a daily basis. All of those experiences serving to push trans people out onto the margins of society, social, economic and legal margins. I'll have more to say about all of that later on. But the bottom line, if you like, of all of this is that far too many trans people experience poor social and emotional well-being, and too many of them get into risky situations and risky behaviors and experience very poor physical health. Far too many worldwide fall victim to violence, fall victim to infection and eventual death. And throughout all of this, the common experience for trans people is often one of poor access to good healthcare provision. Too much healthcare that is available is culturally inappropriate in the sense that the healthcare providers don't really understand the particular health needs of transgender people, may indeed be hostile to them, or they may indeed be clinically not competent in the field of transgender health. So here are just some of the health disparities that trans people face. That is, particular health issues that trans people face as compared to the rest of the population. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I would say this, that quite a few of these health outcomes are associated with life at the margins. In the 2015 US transgender study, 25% participants were unemployed. 45% were living in poverty. And 50% had at least once in their lives experienced homelessness. 39% of participants had experienced serious distress in the previous month. That's an experience of serious distress that is 8 times the rate in the general population. 40% of the participants had attempted suicide at least once in their lives. That's 9 times the rate for the general population. Over here in Australia, well, I'm in Bangkok, but you know what I mean. In a recent national study in Australia, which was actually led at Curtin University, the researchers found that 56% of trans people had been diagnosed with depression at some point in their lives, 4 times the rate for the general population. 38% had been diagnosed with some sort of anxiety disorder. That's around 50% higher than in the general population. The same sort of alarming picture, actually, is evident in national studies in quite a few countries now across the world. And if you're interested, I could supply you with more details. Just contact me. I should also add that in Hong Kong, Tung, in research which I believe is still unpublished, found that 51% of trans patients at government clinics had, over their lifetimes, experienced some sort of mental disorder. The most common disorder was one of depression, and in many cases that was a diagnosis of a major depressive disorder. These levels were over double of the rate that you would find in the general population. 14% of the participants in Dr. Chan's study were experiencing mental disorder at the time of the study. And that's a rate that's comparable to the prevalence for the general population over an entire lifetime. Gender recognition makes it easier, or helps make it easier for transgender people to live the lives that the rest of us take for granted. When transgender people can't get gender recognition, or when they have to jump over hurdles to get it, society makes it difficult for them to lead the lives that they might otherwise lead, and pushes them out towards the margins of society. When your government doesn't recognize your identity, when your government says you are someone you are not, that in itself is an assault of some kind, in my opinion. It means that you carry documents that can out you at every turn, leaving you open to discrimination, exposing you unprotected against prejudice and bigotry, leaving you at risk of embarrassment and humiliation every time you are required to show who you are. In the street, in the bank, at college, at the doctor's surgery, at hospital, in the post office, at the airport, at the Macau ferry terminal, signing an agreement or contract of any sort, getting a phone, getting a job, getting an apartment. Such experiences can contribute to social isolation, unemployment, poverty, homelessness, depression, anxiety, and worse. And I should add that research shows that risk factors for suicidal behaviour in the trans population include unemployment and poverty, as well as experiences of discrimination, verbal and physical abuse, and being recognized as transgender. Again, see me if you want details of that research. I should add also that I've recently, with a colleague in Curtin and with a UN agency, I've recently been doing some research in 4 Southeast Asian countries that shows very clearly that cisgender people, that is cisgender people like me, for example, applying for a job, have a 50% better chance of getting called to an interview than a trans applicant where the employer has clear information that that applicant is trans. So, what do authorities in the world of health say about gender recognition for transgender people? Well, a lot, and mostly about requirements for surgery. There is a reason for that. It's true that surgical requirements undermine people's rights. You've been hearing about this, I'm sure, all day for many trans people, including perhaps as many as a third of those receiving a gender diagnosis at clinics in Hong Kong. Surgery is not a medical necessity. Indeed, for many trans people, surgery is not medically advisable. Extending a set of rights to one group of people with a diagnosis, but not to another with the same diagnosis, based simply on the medical treatment that they have had, makes no sense at all on health grounds. Worse, making gender recognition dependent on surgery effectively undermines the ability of the person concerned to freely consent to that surgery. It involves coercive medicine. In the case of Hong Kong, actually, coerced sterilisation. All of this is true. But such requirements, surgical requirements for gender recognition, enacting as barriers to recognition also make it more difficult for trans people to simply lead the lives that they might otherwise lead, the lives that we take for granted. They therefore help keep trans people, those who've not undergone surgery, those who can't, for whatever reason, undergo surgery, they keep trans people on the edges of society, where they will experience poorer health outcomes. Ooh, excuse me. In 2010, WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, published this clear statement. Now, WPATH is the peak international professional body focusing on transgender health. It's an immensely well-respected organisation, and it publishes the standards of care used by professionals and planners, healthcare planners, worldwide, including in Hong Kong, to guide the provision of healthcare services for transgender people. I want to read it out. No person should have to undergo surgery or accept sterilisation as a condition of identity recognition. If a sex marker is required on an identity document, that marker could recognise the person's lived gender, regardless of reproductive capacity. The WPATH Board of Directors urges governments and other authoritative bodies to move to eliminate requirements for identity recognition that require surgical procedures. That's very clear, and that's coming, I stress this, is coming from a health organisation. But there are many more health organisations that take the same view. Here's the American Medical Association, another influential organisation, in 2014, stating that our AMA supports elimination of any requirement that individuals undergo gender affirmation surgery in order to change their sex designation on birth certificates. And then it goes on. The World Medical Association. Well, the AMA belongs to the World Medical Association. The World Medical Association consists of 112 medical organizations, most of them national medical organizations. It represents over 10 million physicians. And here's the statement that was adopted at the General Assembly in 2015. The WMA reaffirms its position that no person, regardless of gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, medical condition, or disability, should be subjected to forced or coerced permanent sterilization. This also includes sterilization as a condition for rectifying the recorded sex on official documents following gender reassignment. I should say that in these slides, I'm supplying the emphasis. Okay. Now, the World Medical Association, I really need to point out that the Hong Kong Medical Association is also a member of the World Medical Association, and I find it sad. I find it worrying, I think, that neither the Hong Kong Medical Association or for that matter any relevant colleges, the College of Surgeons, the College of Psychiatrists in Hong Kong, none of them have actually, as far as I know, even now, made their positions clear on surgical requirements for gender recognition. And that's despite having multiple opportunities to do so, indeed being invited to do so on more than one occasion. All right, well, just a couple more to go through. The UN Interagency Statement. Now, I'm showing this to you because WHO, if you like, the world's doctor, was the organization that took the lead in the preparation of this document. And you can see that a number of other UN agencies signed on to it. In many countries, transgender and often also intersex persons are required to undergo sterilization surgeries that are often unwanted as the prerequisite to receiving gender affirmative treatment and gender marker changes. According to international and regional human rights bodies and some constitutional courts, and as reflected in recent legal changes in several countries, these sterilization requirements run counter to respect for bodily integrity, self-determination, and human dignity, and can cause and perpetuate discrimination against transgender and intersex persons. Well, you all know that. It goes on to say that states should ensure sterilization or procedures resulting in infertility is not a prerequisite for legal recognition of preferred sex gender. Now, I'm showing you this because it was WHO that took the lead. It was a health organization that took the lead. Well, that was 2014. The year after, there were a whole bunch of other UN agencies that were joining WHO and others in issuing this document on ending violence and discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people. And in a section on protecting individuals from discrimination, you can see this. Transgender people are frequently denied legal recognition of their preferred gender or face abuse requirements, such as forced sterilization, treatment, or divorce to obtain it, without which they suffer exclusion and marginalization. Notice there that in this document, there is a slightly broader focus. The concern is with some of the other preconditions that are put in the way of transgender people seeking gender recognition. It goes on, states should uphold international human rights standards on non-discrimination, including by ensuring legal recognition, gender identity of transgender people without abusive requirements. Let's be absolutely clear about this. This is, I don't know how many UN agencies describing the sorts of requirements which are currently in force in Hong Kong as abusive. I see the hotel is knocking on my door. Finally, WPATH, since it issued that identity recognition statement in 2010, has devoted a tremendous amount of thought to, well, gender recognition and the requirements that governments so often impose. And that very careful consideration led to an update, if you like, of the identity recognition statement in 2015. There is a preamble which really talks about, I won't read this out, but it talks about the importance of gender recognition in transgender people's lives. And then goes on to say, barriers to legal recognition for transgender and transsexual individuals may harm physical and mental health. WPATH continues to oppose surgery or sterilization requirements to change legal sex or gender markers. No particular medical, surgical, or mental health treatment or diagnosis is an adequate marker for anyone's gender identity. So these should not be requirements for legal gender change. You can see here that WPATH is really looking at a very broad range of requirements that are often put in the way of trans people. It goes on, WPATH Standard Care 7, which is used in Hong Kong, by the way, recognises that there is a spectrum of gender identities and that choices of identity limited to male or female may be inadequate to reflect all gender identities. An option of X or other, as examples, may be advisable. Marital status and parental status should not affect legal recognition of gender change, and appropriate legal gender recognition should be available to transgender youth. The right to legal recognition of gender extends to those incarcerated or institutionalized. Court hearings create financial and logistical barriers to legal gender change and may also violate personal privacy or needs. Therefore, WPATH urges governments to eliminate unnecessary barriers and to institute simple and accessible administrative procedures for transgender people to obtain legal recognition of gender consonant with each individual's identity when gender markers on identity documents are considered necessary. In effect, WPATH, the peak professional health organisation concerned exclusively actually with transgender health, openly supports the sort of simple declaration model, gender recognition procedures, which are now available in Argentina, Malta, Denmark, Ireland, and as far as I understand, Norway and Belgium too. Countries worldwide are moving towards more progressive gender recognition arrangements. In 2011, there were no countries employing a declaration model. Now there are 6. And as far as I understand, though Stephen would be able to tell you more about this, the UK and Greece may soon follow. In Europe in 2011, again, there were 7 countries that allowed gender recognition without surgery. 5 years later, there were, I believe, 22 of them. Countries are moving forward. They do so on the grounds of rights and health. Hong Kong has an opportunity, and I'm hoping the government is up to the challenge. Hong Kong can move forward for the health and well-being of our fellow residents of Hong Kong. I still have my permanent ID card. Those of them who are transgender. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all 4 speakers. We've got some time for questions, and the floor is open. Yes, sorry.
Hello. I've got a question about corporate diversity policies. Well, earlier this year, HSBC, they put out a rainbow lion. Subsequently, there was a petition about setting up anti-discrimination law on the grounds of sexuality and gender identity. And HSBC actually didn't sign up in that petition. I myself, I'm a transgender person, and I work in the finance sector. When I found out about this discrepancy, I was a bit disappointed, and even a bit appalled. I mean, it's a kind of, it's hypocritic. And what HSBC was doing, they were queer baiting. And I wonder what are the ways we can deal with this kind of cunning PR stunts, and especially when we have indices like this published, to ensure that all these multinationals they're practicing what they're preaching, and also to make sure that these indices they have credibility.
You're asking me. Darn it. Okay. I think I'm not going to be here to defend HSBC, but I did put their photos up. They were second on our index. They were number 2. And we look at, a number of things. One of the categories obviously is advocacy and community. I think that was a good observation. You should try to call them out. They have been called out. There were some people in their organization that actually wanted to join, but sometimes companies, for some companies it's easier for them to make a decision to join. Some companies, for whatever reason. Okay, banks, I think sometimes, because we had a petition a few years ago, it was an online petition, and most of the banks did not join, but they're actually doing quite a lot of work on LGBT inclusion in the organization. So I think there's a lot of different dimensions to LGBT inclusion. I hope we want companies to come out because we feel that the business community is a very strong force to, to lobby the government in Hong Kong. This business does have a tremendous amount of influence, especially if it's in a big organization like HSBC, even more than the likes of Goldman Sachs and so on, who do not have branches on the street. So I talked to them. A number of people did talk to them, but you should definitely call them out as well.
Definitely will.
Yeah. I don't know. Anybody else want? EOC, do you want to say anything about that? No.
Hello. Hi, Sam. This is Suen. Nice to meet you again. Do you have any updates on the ICD 11? Good or bad?
Yes. I'm not that close to it now because I was very public in my views about some of the things that WHO were proposing, and since then they do not send me Christmas cards. But my understanding is that ICD is still up for approval. ICD 11 is still up for approval in 2018 in May, when the World Health Assembly, the governing body of WHO, meets in Geneva. My understanding is that WHO is still supporting the creation of a new chapter on conditions related to sexual health, and that it will be in this chapter that the diagnoses for transgender people will be placed. that the name of the diagnosis, I understand, will still be gender incongruence rather than transsexualism or gender identity disorder. I think the problem for me is that WHO still very much supports the idea of there being a diagnosis for children under the age of puberty. It seems to me that adolescents and adults need a diagnosis in order to access hormones and surgery. Those trans people who have a medical need for hormones and surgery, a diagnosis enables them to access that sort of treatment in most health systems worldwide. But children under the age of puberty have no need for any of that. They simply need the space to allow them to explore who they are. And the support and awareness and, quite honestly, the love that will allow them to embrace who they are, become comfortable expressing who they are, and perhaps deal with the occasionally hostile reaction they may encounter from those around them. That's what they need, and they shouldn't be getting diagnosed with any sort of medical condition when their needs are of that sort. That's the disagreement, and that's why I don't get Christmas cards anymore.
I would like to ask. Okay, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Hello, Sam. This is Geoffrey. Hi.
Hi, Geoffrey.
Hello. I actually don't have this question, but I'm asking you because I want you to be able to help clarify something. So the way in which the IWG, the terms of reference, as you are aware, they use the word transsexual, and people often come to me and they ask me if transsexual only means people who take steps to physically transition. Mm-hmm. I would try to explain that that doesn't seem to be the case, but because I'm not an expert in health and you are, so I would like to ask you to clarify what the word transsexual actually means, and whether using the word transsexual would limit the terms of reference for the IWG. Thank you.
Of course, trans people can identify. I mean, if I can start off by saying trans people can identify in whatever way they want, and there are many trans people who would describe themselves as transsexual, many trans people who would describe themselves as transgender, and there are so many identity labels that are available worldwide. But if we focus on the word transsexualism as it's used by WHO in ICD-10, that's the manual that we've been using for over 25 years now. Transsexualism is defined in terms of a desire to live and be accepted as a member of the opposite sex. Now, that's very binary thinking, opposite sex, and remember this is a document that is 25 years old, but the key thing is it's defined in terms of a desire to live and be accepted as a member of, well, a gender other than the one that you were assigned at birth. Let's put it that way. It does go on to say that usually people with this diagnosis will seek some sort of medical treatment. But the word is euclid, and I know from my own bitter experience how carefully words are chosen in these documents. So it's very clear to me that a diagnosis of transsexualism and the word transsexual actually does not properly necessarily describe a person who has had surgery or any form of medical treatment actually or even intends to. I prefer for me, the word transsexual and transgender, they are synonymous. Although, I have to say again, any individual should be free to use whatever identity label they choose to use.
One issue that was addressed either explicitly or implicitly in all three presentations is the psychological impact of stigma on non-recognition on trans people, so depression, suicidal thoughts, substance abuse. But of course, these psychological effects, they're not specific to the trans community, right? I mean, they affect sexual minority groups across the board. And my question is, and this is addressed perhaps primarily to Sam, but also to the other panelists. I mean, as a matter of policy, I mean, would it make more sense to address this kind of psychological impact, kind of group by group? The impact on the trans community, the impact on the gay community, on the bisexual community? Or would it make more sense to kind of think about stigma and non-recognition more universally? So in other words, are the factors that lead to the kinds of psychological impacts that we've been talking about, specific to each group? Or is a more holistic kind of assessment more sensible? And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Okay. I was going to say Sam will go first and then I'll follow. I was thinking, I think that question, one concept from the psychological literature that was developed by Ilan Meyer, I think he's now based at UCLA, the concept of minority stress is really useful to think about that. So basically that talks about, well, anyone in society would experience these different stressful events anyway, but for minority people, so that would be in addition to that. And that's also cumulative as well. It accumulates across the life course as well. And also I think in particular in relation to this debate about legal gender recognition, one particular point that I find particularly interesting for that concept is that it says that both actualized experiences of discrimination would bring stress. That's very understandable, right? That when you experience someone hitting you, say a hate crime, or someone discriminating against you, you would experience stress. But I think for that concept, and other interesting aspect is that he argues that expectedness, or that uncertainty, whether you would be discriminated against or whether you would be accepted or not, would also bring stress as well. So that's also, I think, that argues for the importance of legal gender recognition. You can't allow a transgender person to be left on their own to say that, well, this instance, someone might be kind to me, and other instance, and other service provider might deny service to me. That's also very stressful and inducing to bad health as well. So I think that concept is very useful to bring in that, particular in thinking about whether there should be legal gender recognition, which in my mind is a non-question, as I argued earlier. But I think in terms of whether it should be treated together, I think that's a lot of like commonality if we look at, say, discrimination experienced by LGBTI people, that there is not only applicable to transgender people, and also I think because in a way, whether if we like go back to the early discussions about whether discussions about LGBTI people should be grouped together or not, that also relates to the issue that what a lot of gender and sexual minorities face anyway is to do with how society is very fixated about binaries, about very fixated about not someone who's not being able to fit into any kind of expectations that they have in mind. So if we take that kind of thinking, then there is a lot of issues that we can think about that, because let alone if we think about someone's sexual orientation may be perceived based on their gender performance, and a lot of these expectations may not work in society, and those sort of guessing work may not work. So it's like a lot of, if we wanted to deal with the deep root of the issue, it's dealing with how society should be able to handle more of diversity in the gender and sexual world anyway. And
yeah, I think the whole area of mental stress and to be positive mental well-being, it's complex, and many companies are expressing that they need to do a lot more and understand the issues and the circumstances that within the workplace that drive or lead to mental stress and illness. One of the things that we are starting to focus more on, it's in another sort of pillar of the work that we do on ensuring employee well-being, we are going to have a focus on mental health. We are working on a mental health toolkit, but just within the LGBT space. I mean, I think it's, we don't want to stereotype, but we also need to understand that, I've learned, like working with people in the transgender community, everybody has their own story and their own journey, and in terms of their own life, what they choose to do. So you get into maybe organizational or behaviors and processes and things, but then you get into just how you talk to people, questions into an area. I just read an article on something called Microaggressions, which is about subtle, indirect questions or behaviors. It's not out of malice, but just by asking the wrong question or saying the wrong thing, you are, showing some kind of discrimination. So it's a pretty complex area. I think that, there's going to be a tremendous amount of work. There is a lot of work going on around the world in some of these areas. And for us in Hong Kong, we at Community Business definitely going to be an area for us to take forward. But it is, it's definitely not easy.
Great. Time for one final question, perhaps? If not, then please join me in thanking the panelists for a very interesting discussion.
Okay. Now, before we officially close the conference, I'm very, very pleased to invite Professor Alfred Chan, the chairperson of the Hong Kong Equal Opportunities Commission, to make some closing remarks. And we're very honored to have you here. And also, we're very happy that the Equal Opportunities Commission has helped to co-sponsor, co-organize the forum today.
Right, so it's so exciting to hear what has been said. EOC is very pleased, of course, to have collaborated with Hong Kong U in holding this forum, and that Professor Stephen Whittle, who had just gone and catch his plane, who we know very well at the EOC and was able to attend from the UK and provide his expert insights into international developments. EOC is also very pleased that so many stakeholders, including transgender groups, individuals, the business sector, community business, Fern's here, lawyers, expert academics, and members of the general public have participated in this forum, which highlights the importance of the issue to many different groups in society. EOC, again, is committed to promoting the equality of all LGBTI people in Hong Kong, including all transgender people, of course. As already mentioned by Peter in his presentation earlier, in relation to introducing LGBTI anti-discrimination legislation, we have also previously made submissions to the government. I'm glad, actually, this might be the first time that government officials actually attended one of the LGBTI sessions. So well done, for the first time. in particular, in relation to, for this forum, in relation to marriage amendment bill calling on the government to introduce gender recognition legislation that fully respects transgender people's basic human rights. On the consultation, we have been hosting a series of meetings of key holders to discuss the consultation and related work being done. This has been a very helpful method for sharing key developments internationally and in Hong Kong linked to the consultation. And EOC is also will be making detailed submissions in response to the consultation, and we encourage everyone here that supports equality for transgender people and their rights to self-determination to also make submissions in support of the gender recognition legislation, for which we have spoken so much today. With this note, we thank you and look forward to working with you again on these issues in the near future. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now it just falls on me to officially close the forum. But first, I really want to thank a number of people for helping to get this the forum off the ground today. In addition to the Equal Opportunities Commission, Professor Chen, and also Peter, I also want to thank all of the panelists and the moderators, Azan and Marco, for their participation and also their valuable input in planning the program. I'd also want to thank my colleagues at the center and in the faculty, Joyce, Anna, Eddie, Murphy, the whole IT team, all of the student volunteers who came today. Thank you all for all of your help. And finally, I mean, we can't close the forum without thanking Lily. And I don't even know if she's, okay, she's over there. I mean, Lily has worked tirelessly, has been incredibly conscientious, and I think all of you who've been involved know that, you know, she's really been the person who's organized this this event today. So I really want to thank her very much for all of her hard work. There's been a lot of valuable information and ideas that have been shared today in the discussion. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be producing a report based on the event today. And we will also be submitting, making a submission to the consultation exercise on behalf of the Center for Comparative and Public Law. And I, again, along with Professor Chan and other people today, I encourage all of you to participate. And that has been a key theme, right? Participation, inclusion, compassion. There are a lot of key words that have come up that have really resonated with me in thinking about issues around gender recognition and equality more generally. So thank you all very much.